Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Full Participation is a Human Right Conference and Arts Festival, now in its third year. We're very excited about this 4-day series of conversations, talks, and breakout sessions, culminating in an arts festival to fully engage your head, your heart, and your spirit, and to generate energy for the fights that we're waging. It's been a difficult year for Black and brown people, poor people, or anyone trying to withstand the bulwark of hate, violence, virulence, and deprivation that's been unleashed. People are fighting for medical care. They're fighting in the streets about police violence. They're unemployed, they're being evicted, working to ensure that their children can be educated. People are returning from prison trying to rejoin a community that does not even offer even the basics to its members, never mind those damaged and displaced by the punishment system. These are the subjects of the conversations for the next 3 days, and the need to invest in people. And that is the theme of this year's conference. Invest in us, the movement for a livable society. And the purpose of this conference and arts festival is to bring people together, to better understand the conditions in which we're living and our struggles to achieve what we need to live. Housing, food security, work with dignity for a living wage, healthcare, education, a self-determined community with resources that is safe for everyone. We bring people together because there's so many barriers to overcome and so many struggles to get just what we need to live with dignity. And because all of these struggles have become atomized, we see the struggle for a right to housing over here and the struggle to work with dignity and safe conditions over there. They're all essential and interdependent, and we need them all to live and fully participate in the community. And yet they're so often treated like bargaining chips and separate. And like the Black liberation struggle, what we're all struggling for is to live as a full human being in a society rooted in colonization and where its racialized structures and institutions determine social position and access to its resources. That is why our fight is grounded in human rights, to ensure everyone has the resources to live a meaningful life. We do not struggle just to survive and subsist, but to have what is needed to grow and develop across the life course. Our work is to come together around values and norms and to build structures that do not reproduce structural white dominance or deprivation and suffering. So over the next 3 days, you'll hear life stories and dialogue and have the opportunity to participate in 10 panels, 3 breakout groups, and an arts festival that engages our hearts and our minds and imaginations as we come together around what we are fighting for when we leave this space. And we aim to continue the partnerships and struggle, to keep these dialogues and connections going so we can expand our movement for full participation in the life of the community, the full participation movement. So thank you for joining us. We look forward to hearing your voice in these conversations and to working together as we move forward.
Hi, I'm Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now! It's wonderful to hear Kim and to see that video. And I so deeply believe in full participation as a human right. It really is what Democracy Now! Is about. We're just about to celebrate our 25th anniversary. We broadcast on over 1,500 public television and radio stations around the world. Our headline's also available in Spanish. It's a daily, grassroots, global, unembedded, independent, international investigative news hour. So critical to bringing out the voices of people on the front lines and how deeply appreciative I think we all are, and so many of you are on those front lines, either as essential workers holding up this economy, keeping this society going, or you are on the streets. I would say even protesters are essential workers today, trying to improve our society. Well, This evening, it's such an honor to kick off this series and to be able to introduce to you a professor who is not just an academic. She is a scholar. She is an activist. She is an icon. She'll be speaking for about a half an hour or so, and then I will be joining her in conversation. And we highly encourage you to send in your questions, because full participation is what it's all about. It's the only thing that is going to change what we are facing today as we deal with these cataclysms in this country, from poverty to the pandemic, to the climate crisis, to inequality. And we're going to discuss all of these issues. But let me introduce you now to Professor Rose Brewer, Professor of African American Studies at the University of Minnesota. Hello, Professor. It's great to see you.
Same here.
Well, but before you get started, I've got to give your full bio because it is so utterly impressive. Professor Rose Brewer is an activist, a scholar, the Morse Alumni Distinguished Teaching Professor and past chairperson of the Department of African American and African Studies at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. She has affiliated appointments in sociology and gender, women, and sexuality studies. Professor Brewer publishes extensively on Black feminism, political economy, social movements, race, class, gender, and social change. Her books and edited volumes include the award-winning The Color of Wealth, the U.S. Social Forum, Perspectives of a Movement, and several other co-edited volumes. She's published numerous essays, book chapters, referee journal articles. Her current book project examines the impact of late capitalism on Black life in the United States. Professor Brewer has held the Sociologist for Women in Society Feminist Lectureship in Social Change at Miami University of Ohio. She also taught at University of Wisconsin-Madison and at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She is a winner of the American Sociological Association's Distinguished Teaching Award and a Josie Johnson Social Justice Award recipient. Professor Brewer is a founding member of the Black Radical Congress, which I want to talk with her about after her speech, the People's Strike, and a founding board member of Project South, the Institute for the Elimination of Poverty and Genocide. Professor Brewer, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Amy. It truly is a pleasure being here this evening. The conference is an amazing gathering of individuals, and I am deeply, deeply moved to be a part of this endeavor. Deep appreciation to the Community Service Society for its decades of fighting against poverty and exclusion. I have a glimpse into the love and the care that was taken to put this conference together. Our communities, radicals, artists, activists, freedom fighters, all. I offer appreciation especially for all the invisible labor that brings us to this day and keeps us moving through, too often unnamed or lifted up. Asante Sana. Thank you. Where to begin? I know the conference charge means understanding that fundamental change for creating a livable society demands fighters and thinkers. Thinkers become fighters and fighters thinkers, as revolutionary ancestor General Baker, founder of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers in Detroit, so powerfully asserted. On his visionary shoulders stand. I draw also upon the insights of writer, radical Chuck Morris. He states, "It is the task of the radical critic, and I assert intellectual, to illuminate what is repressed and excluded by the basic mechanisms of a given social order. It is the task of the politically engaged critic to side with the excluded and repressed, to develop insights gained in confrontation with injustice, to nourish cultures of resistance, and to help define the means with which society can be rendered adequate to the full breadth of human potentialities. I lean into the brilliance of ancestor scholar of the Black radical tradition, Dr. Cedric Robinson, who contended to assert Black history and its importance in a society that negates such a possibility is itself a radical act. And the power and wisdom of sister queer Black feminist ancestor Audre Lorde, reminding us that the true focus of revolutionary change is never merely the oppressive situations which we seek to escape, but the peace of the oppressor, which is planted deep within each of us. Our fight has always been for freedom. This goes to the heart of Black struggle in the US and globally. My fight has certainly been about deep transformational change. This commitment rendered raw and clear in Minneapolis, my home city. We still feel the wounds of the George Floyd police murder, catalyzing rebellion, sparking resistance, which continues leading into the US elections, barely 2 weeks away. In the wake of the seemingly endless list of Black deaths by police, Minneapolis is forever epicenter of uprise, where the issues are structural and national, systemic, white supremacist, and racial capitalist, patriarchal. Now so clear, the mystification of the city, of the US nation, the veneer is gone, and what it has professed to be, and what it is now, currently revealed, forever changed. This moment expresses its profound urgency, the culmination of a long durée of anti-Blackness, police violence that too often has gone unnamed and unredressed in my city, in this United States. The wounds are deep and require more than the statement that they will not let it happen again. From the mouths of the powers that be, while the people demand our full human rights, self-determined, the key question is, what will it take for fundamental change to happen? The spirit is calling for justice, and there is the material reality of the ground shifting, the clarion cry for our humanity, housing, food, health, breathable air, securing the planet. The hard knot is this: what about a system of power that behind the face of the police, intertwined in the deeply rooted racial inequalities, articulated in economic dispossession, state violence, educational and health exclusions of the poor, Black, brown, indigenous, white? For Black communities in my city, some of the worst inequities there are in the nation. A bit more about that city of Minneapolis, until recently hidden behind the notion of liberalism. In the wake of the Floyd killing, 30 years ago, a no-knock drug raid, SWAT team ended the death of an elderly couple on the predominantly Black North Side. The house burned and they died of carbon monoxide poisoning, chillingly similar to the no-knock, wrong house, police murder, guns blazing this time, leading to the murder of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. The seemingly endless list of African American, male and female, gone, young and old, gay, straight, trans, able, disabled, killed by the police, killed by the state. From the white settler colonialism that initiated the state of Minnesota with the removal of the Dakota people, the white settler project of the U.S. into the current period structures the legacies and ongoing practices of white supremacism and the protection of property of capital. It is an ignoble and violent history, this nation's formation and evolution. Its deepest roots are in the conquering and building of a white settler project, highly militarized and exploitable. It is rooted in racial slavery, which expropriated Black labor and bodies. It is genocidal of indigenous lands, being, and culture. This is the story of a society generative of the ethos of a white nationalism, xenophobia, and violence that are deeply intertwined in the very operation of the social order into today. It sourced the burning down of the Black community in the city of my birth, the community I was raised, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Moreover, from the 15th century to the 19th, the expropriation of Black labor would be the greatest engine of Europe's wealth. The British would enter into this buying and selling of human beings to build its North American colonies. These colonies would ultimately become the site of a burgeoning slave trade. The wealth of what would become the new nation of the United States was built on the violent seizure of these lands and the stolen labor of the enslaved. The very bodies of African men and women commodified, a source of great wealth for the few. Brought in chains, my ancestors produced sugar, tobacco, rice, indigo, and of course, cotton. For banks, shipbuilding, and shackle making, slavery was the engine of the entire U.S. economy, both South and North. And what of this, given the conference demand of investing in us, rooted in the recognition of the necessity of movement for a livable society. The current moment reveals this is a system in deep trouble today. During a period of COVID-19 pandemic, at least 221,000 people in the U.S. are dead, and over 8 million COVID cases, disproportionately Black and brown, expanding daily. The numbers are catastrophic globally. Millions of people in the U.S. remain unemployed, houseless, dispossessed of rights, most direly Black, brown, and indigenous communities. This surplus population rendered clearly that labor is increasingly expendable, and in this wake, the intensification of state violence, police violence, and occupation in our communities. And given the current realities, violence often turns inward, domestic disproportionately against women, children, trans, disinvestment from schools, housing, health are part and parcel of the neoliberal equation of privatization and military spending first. The crisis of accumulation is a foundational feature of the capitalist crisis today. Too many goods, chasing too few dollars, deep concentrated wealth in a tiny elite. Corporate profit is high, while the interior crumbles. Most of the goods produced cannot be purchased locally or globally. The consequences for the working class are harsh. Flat wages, no work, dangerous work, economic dispossession, increasingly immiseration of the class as mass incarceration chases. Prisons indeed are silos of hyper-extraction. We are confronting the consequences of a rapacious, profit-driven system. Gender and sexuality are deeply intertwined here, with race and class in the politics of exclusion. Indeed, we are in a particular crisis of capitalism in which contradictions are sharpened between the corporatized, extractive, financialized economy and human needs and the Earth's own limits. We also know this about the current moment. the permissions given to white terrorist formations to come into the light. While it is true that there are distinct underpinnings to today's white right nationalist articulations, the country's formation as a white settler colony, hierarchically rooted in white supremacism, early signalized the deep foundational roots of color preference, gendered hierarchy, and class. Before Charlottesville, there was Baltimore, and before Baltimore, Ferguson, and before Ferguson, and so on. There's a long era of racism, anti-Black violence, and negation that continues into the current period. This is not simply the story of an aggrieved white working class. Since Trump and Trumpism gained support from middle and upper class whites, as well as a section of capital. Just as historically, it is a profit-driven system. It is a world system, and it's a system in deep crisis today. During the period of this COVID pandemic, conflict and wars, 800 military bases across the globe, a near $1 trillion spent on defense, as folk are unsheltered, in food lines, and die of preventable diseases. As noted, importantly, gender is intertwined in transnational capitals articulation. At its center is highly exploitable girls' and women's labor, sexual and otherwise, named essential at this point. The fiction of Black women being undeserving and publicly on the drain continues as the representation. Xenophobia, discourses that involve ending entitlements. This narrative of unworthiness is the linchpin of a racialized, gendered austerity rhetoric. Why are we spending our money on those people? Indeed, fewer and fewer people are needed in the everyday operation of late capitalism. And this has been so for a very long time. And just as canaries in the mine shaft, labor displacement signals that fewer workers of all types are needed given late capitalism structure. Chillingly today, where Black labor is most exploited and extractable, given this reality, is in mass incarceration, cheap prison labor with all of its snares of exclusion. Indeed, this is not simply an economic crisis of the world system, but encompasses multiple crises of racism, patriarchy, the political economy of a neoliberal order. The fundamental fact is this: a small elite possesses the majority of the wealth of the earth. But this is not the end of the story. There is the fight back, the demand to stop killing us, as Alicia Garza of Black Lives Matter has asserted. This is the linchpin of the current movement against anti-Black racism in the US, in deep accord with the longue durée of the Black liberation movement. BLM has changed the conversation about policing and community safety, indeed changing the face of resistance in the US and internationally. As another generation and intergeneration come to grips with building movement for transformation, let's not forget a final point, or a finer point. That is, so much of this is female gender-led, often gender non-conforming, and draws upon Black radical feminist praxis. This places front and center the theorization of simultaneity, articulating the deep interrelationality of gender, sexuality, race, and class for liberation and building a new society. This continues to be an essential corrective to masculinist tropes for radical change. This opens a wider emancipatory context, challenging white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and economic exploitation, while lifting up the global importance of resisting imperialism, colonialism, coloniality. While George Floyd's police murder catalyzed the current ongoing uprise, it is an affirmation of the fact that the fight is on and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. Where from here? We march against racist police murders and gentrification. We fight for a living wage for workers, paid and unpaid reproductive labor, the scourge of poverty and its intensification under COVID-19, as well as for the very survival of the planet. We demand housing and rent-free, food and health care. And here is the fundamental question. What will it take to transform the society? How can we take the steps necessary to move for this goal? How do we use our strengths to catalyze radical change? How can we strategically and tactically win? What is quite clear, the intellectual and political agendas of those committed to human liberation are stretched thin as humanity confronts the logic of transnational crises, ecological, economic, social. Moreover, the current period requires complex theoretical and practice understanding of the complicated interrelationality of these systems. We know of Ferguson. We know of this era of Trumpism and global right-wing nationalism. There must be the will to rebel, the revolutionary embrace and political will to build a new society. We can confront the chinks in the existing system to express resistance and grow alternatives, localize, concrete to global. We can assert the need for linked struggles, a national strategy at multiple levels. We can and must build movement in a way that has not been deeply enabled, melding dispossession across genders, ethnicities, classes, sexualities, interlinked. The system will not transform itself. This must come from us forcing change. The work is cut out. What must be built is a tough, robust movement aligning multiple complexities. At the center of our leadership are those deeply impacted by economic, political, and social dispossession. So the old and the new must move forward to deep interconnectivity. We must have vision, and our charge is this: to imagine a different world and to fight for it, to be doers and movers in our communities, classrooms, and in and out of university spaces, to pass this passionate commitment on, to imagine and act on the demand for peace and justice, a world of peace and justice. And I want to draw a little bit from Brother Cornel West, who in writing about the visionary Dr. King also put on the table many of his insights, including we must have a revolution in our priorities, a reevaluation of our values, a reinvigoration of our public life, and a fundamental transformation of our way of thinking and living that promotes a transfer of power from a tiny elite to everyday people and ordinary citizens. This is concretely expressed by our conference over the next 3 days. Full participation is a human right. Concretely, we can grow and change and commit to struggle for a better world. I came across just today an article that was written just today. I think it was on my email feed, but the words of Sada Gonzalez, I don't know if anyone happened to see that particular essay, who in fact is from Brooklyn, New York, and spoken the words of Black mothers. I won't try to excerpt everything, but a few things I think are worth living up, given the spirit of our gathering. And she says, throughout the diaspora, Black mothers, grandmothers, and our other mothers are the backbone of our communities, ultimately becoming radical protesters against the conditions which their children are the innocent victims of. In the words of Danny McClain, quote, imagine what we could do if we actually were on fertile soil and not in a desert, end quote. In order to cope with the system of slavery in our modern capitalist system, Black women have turned to a communal solution that rejects the neglect of our children economic systems of white supremacy requires. Our children are often left in the care of others, or we ourselves are taken under the wing of other Black aunties, grandmamas, and mothers who guide and nurture us. There were times, and there will be times, that I will be bouncing a crying child on my hip, delivering an academic presentation while stirring dinner. Jasmine and Mia Walker were women who would walk into my home, take my child from me, and finish dinner. This is revolutionary itself. Passed down as a survival mechanism, it becomes a dynamic form of kinship that provides children with guidance and love. Motherhood through COVID-19 as a Black woman revealed a duality of softness and strength to an extent I did not know I was capable of, but now know is in my blood. It's ancestral, this determination, this fierce resistance. Ashe. I say, let this moment of uprise, this moment of vision, be one of social transformation for social change. We will bring victory over racism, economic exploitation, and sexism. We need vision for a new society, and we need practice. We need a program and a plan. We need solidarity with those fighting to defend oppression all over the world, to defeat it. For those who believe in freedom cannot rest, Miss Ella Baker. We must move forward with the best of human actions and intentions, standing on the shoulders of those great ones who sometimes died fighting the scourge of domination. A power struggle for freedom and liberation and self-determination. For the Black liberation struggle, this is what self-determination looks like. I restate, not in my words, but from the century-long recognition, as well as the words, more recently, of the SNCC freedom fighters. If our community has little or no to say in its possibilities, this must change. If and when exploitative systems control our lives, this must change. Whether in fact we live or die is controlled by those who exploit us. What more powerful desire than for self-determination? To be free, to live and breathe free, to invest in us. Asante Sana. Thank you.
What a beautiful speech. Professor Rose Brewer, thank you so much. I want to tell people that as we speak, feel free to send in questions, and Rob Robinson will be joining us in about a half an hour to share some of those questions and commentary. There's so many directions to go in right now, and I was so struck when you talked about coming from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and all that has meant. And I was wondering if we could go back to that day in June 19th, Juneteenth, actually, that President Trump planned to give a speech at the Tulsa arena. But there was such outcry because of the significance of that day the day African Americans observe as the ultimately the official ending of slavery, though it was years before. It was only that enslaved Africans in Texas learned about the proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation. But Juneteenth is a revered day.
Absolutely.
And he was going to speak on that day. And because of outcry, Donald Trump was forced to put his speech off a day, but he still did it in Tulsa, where we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the massacres and the burning of what was known as Black Wall Street. And I was wondering, Professor Brewer, if you can talk about the significance of your hometown and what that period meant to you, both the disrespect that President Trump was showing, but also the pushback. I mean, especially at a time of the pandemic, when it was clear that COVID-19 would be surging in Tulsa, but that didn't stop the president, the super spreader in chief.
Yes, indeed. It was an amazing feeling, pride given the resistance, knowing so much about the legacy of the what we are now calling the massacre, but also seeing a generation of younger Black freedom fighters who said, along with white allies, no, this is not going to happen. An amazing moment. And the tragedy of the illiteracy of, the disrespect of someone who, quote, is leader, is beyond words. But the fight back, the recognition of the preciousness of that legacy, that history of all that has gone into unearthing it was a good moment for me. I do travel back. I still have family there, and am really struck by the lasting legacy of the loss of resources and intergenerational wealth and the consequences of that into the current moment. But an amazing moment to stand up, fight back, and to see that happen in my hometown.
And can you share with people what actually happened? And I mean, I believe it's not clear how many hundreds of African Americans were killed on that day in 1921, when the white population rose up against, or certain sectors of it, against the African American population.
Yes, I mean, it really is a national story in some ways. This is post-World War I. And in fact, economically, the country was to some extent in recession. My understanding of the economic context of it, and there had been the growth of a very substantial Klan presence. But as that history is unearthed, the decision making, as with all state violence, goes all the way to the top. From the political decision maker, the mayor, of course, the police, the sheriffs, the newspaper, all of them were complicit in the process. So the story is a familiar one. It was apparently a situation where a white woman, an elevator operator, supposedly was assaulted by a young Black man. The rumor got out, and that, of course, was the lighting of the fire. But Tulsa had another distinction. It developed in that period a very vibrant economy, an economic base that in some ways was unparalleled. Businesses, independent development that in the context of recession just stoked the ire of those without. And, you know, sociologists have known for a long time that economic dispossession in the context of racism is a volatile mix. And so jealousy, racism, in the context of the rumor, the story, there was an absolute attack. There have been many analysis of what actually happened, but apparently there was fight back. That's my understanding. But the Black fight back was overcome, and the burning began. The houses in the Greenwood, Peoria area, which was the heart of the Black community, were destroyed. It's been estimated that over 300 people, possibly more, were killed. It has been noted that perhaps World War I aircraft bombed the area. Intense, violent, fascistic terrorism, and the rounding up of those who survived, the ethnic cleansing, if you will. It's a story that is too little known. And by the 1990s, a commission had been established, and some light was thrown on it. I just read a couple of pieces a few days ago that they're finding or trying to find the bones of the folk who were killed. And there had been some evidence that many people had been thrown into one of the rivers there. So it's a gruesome story. But that's the context. And I would say, the afterlives of Red Summer 21, the context in which it emerged, and the particularities of Tulsa as a vibrant Black community was a volatile situation.
So Trump goes and gives a speech. He is outwitted by high school kids on TikTok, and they, get all the free tickets. He thinks 1 million people are coming, maybe 6,000 do. But his staff is seen taking away the social distancing signs that would stop people from make people sit in every other seat. And so thousands do pack in. Among them, and in one of the front rows, was the African-American former presidential candidate Herman Cain, who was not wearing a mask, as so few people were, because of what President Trump modeled, was to wear a mask means you're weak. And very soon after that, Herman Cain would become sick with COVID, and a few weeks later, he would die. And COVID surged in Tulsa, and particularly hit hard the Black and brown communities.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to go to that issue of what the pandemic has exposed, the fissures in our society, the fact that it doesn't hit everyone equally. And, Community Service Society is known for helping people get access to health care, fighting against inequality, and to eradicate poverty. And what we've seen in this country, 2-3 times the number of hospitalizations, infections, and deaths of African American, Latinx, and Native American peoples in this country. Could you comment on this? And do you think it plays into part of why President Trump is so utterly reckless when it comes to how he deals with the pandemic that could ultimately, in 2 weeks, take him down?
Well, that's an important question. It does, as I noted in my remarks, reveal beneath the surface that which was actually operative for a very long time, the lack of access to good health care, quality housing. We know that polluted air, the environmental injustices that many Black, brown, indigenous communities suffer are all part of this equation when you think about the disproportionate impact of COVID. We also know that the work that's being done that can't be done from home is often done by Black, brown folk, putting their lives at risk without proper PP access. So to get to your question, I like the analysis that the deeply rooted structural inequalities were there, that they have been invisibilized, if you will, to some extent. But under this pandemic, the reality, the deep reality of these inequalities are exposed. Even before COVID, and I mentioned my state, it was fairly apparent. And this actually goes back many, many, many years, that the disparities, especially in states that apparently were good and liberal, were real. 29% home ownership in a city where 80% white ownership exists, lack of access to quality education, lack of access. There's a whole tier of the Midwest, and I would include the Tulsa story to some extent in that. I think I'd mentioned that often we looked toward the Midwest, into Kansas, into Missouri, and the position of the African American population in these middle Midwest cities is a story that needs to be told. It's an incredible neglect, I think, on the part of scholars, and slowly and increasingly being revealed. That's the reason so little is known about Minneapolis and St. Paul and its so-called race relations. But the reality of the pandemic that's hitting so many people hard, not surprising, actually, Amy, in the sense of what was underneath that's now revealed. Surely we know that Donald Trump is a human being, if you will, who cares little for anyone. And there's no doubt that the calculus there might be that these people don't matter anyway. But I won't lay it at the feet of Donald Trump per se, because neoliberalism under other political decision makers did not address these issues. So there's a lot of culpability to go around, whether Democrat or Republican, in terms of really digging deep into the kind of social order that would be fair and just and equitable. And that struggle is going to go on whether Donald Trump is in office or not.
Well, what about that? How do you see this struggle as you talk about? I mean, there you are in Minneapolis. It was Memorial Day that George Floyd's life was snuffed out of him because a police officer and his accomplices, other police officers, ended up suffocating him to death under their knees. The Black Lives Matter movement coming out in force, even during the pandemic, in New York, where we are, where you are, of course, in Minneapolis, you were at ground zero. What you see changing, depending on who is in the White House and what the administration is that's there, how you see social change happening?
Well, clearly, I mean, we're in a conference where there is recognition that policy can make a difference. The nature of that policy, who propagates it, under which understandings, is very, very critical. The idea that any of the policies that are currently in play that don't go deeper and more foundationally to the source of the disease of this society are policies that we are going to have to push back very hard. I also know that there is a sense of change that goes beyond a policy narrative, that there are those in the struggle for liberation, in the Black freedom movement, who understand, not alone but with others, that the whole nature of this social order has to be reorganized, has to be rethought with a vision of a different kind uh, of society, one not rooted in individualism in its nth degree, one that is rooted in collectivity and solidarity and cooperative efforts. And that vision is being propagated by some and is at, I think, the intersection of the world we have and the world that we might want to create. I strictly believe in strategy and moving in a strategic direction. That means that down the road, where do we want to be? How do we get there? These are some of the things that I raised in my remarks. The marches are great. The making noise, direct action often brings the goods. But how do we get to where we want to be if the end product is justice, self-determination? That's a different kind of calculus, a different kind of organizing meter. And some of that, I'm glad to say, is happening with an eye on the longer road, on that so-called revolutionary road, if you will. And definitely that's work that will have to happen, whomever's in office. And the pressure has to be on, for sure, whoever's in office, by us. And one of the really rewarding things about seeing what's happening with the actions in New York and other places is that folks seem determined not to stop. We'll see. I mean, we'll see how far this goes. But this is one of those moments, maybe one of those moments, or certainly a defining moment where something fundamentally different might be able to be catalyzed.
Can you take us back in order for us to look forward? In your history, we are one of the founders of the Black Radical Congress, the People's Strike, especially for younger people who are watching right now. Explain how these came about, what these formations were.
Well, surely, if you look at the, I would say, 500-year history, there have been many formations, and obviously in my lifetime, it's a more recent history, but always operating in the context of the organizations you mentioned, through the Black radical tradition, which is something coined by Cedric Robinson, but I think rightly puts on the table that the issue is not being necessarily brought into a burning house, but to, and that's Malcolm X's words, but to transform that. And all of those organizations had a transformatory vision, a sense of political order that was generative, that was built in solidarity, that honored the Black spirit and humanity. And in 1998, largely through the vision and thinking of folk like, for example, Cornel West and Barbara Ransby and Bill Fletcher and Jamala Rogers, the vision that I talked about, the idea that in that period where nothing seemed very much to be going on post the 1960s into the 70s, post the Black Power movement, that the time was long past to think once again, to lift up once again those traditions of the Black radical heritage, and organized some of the thinkers, I as a founding member and a number of others, were drawn into conversations about what this might look like, and culminating in its formal establishment in 1998 at the University of Illinois, Chicago, when over 2,000 attendees happened, with an eye on really rebuilding the Black left in this country and all that represented. Fast forwarding to the current work around the People's Strike, that of course emerged in the context of COVID-19, and I would say the effort and the vision and the reality of those on the front lines who demanded pay and protection and benefits, whether they were working at Amazon or Walmart or wherever. And there were also efforts by dock workers in San Francisco. And they've always been very, very attuned to who can stop this system from running when it's hurting people. And so it's in that context, the absolute need of folk who are doing the work that we can't really exist without, that the people strike emerged under the leadership of Cooperation Jackson. Speaking of an organization that has a different vision of certainly policy to some extent, but also the idea of building a solidarity economy, an economy where the resources of the earth are in the hands, the cooperative hands of the people.
Professor, keep speaking. I'm just plugging in my computer because I see it's about to die, but keep going.
Okay. So, I mean, there is a through line. I would say the 500-year legacy. I was just lecturing to my one of my classes about the earliest expression of that. In this country, the early collaboration, late 16th into the 17th century, between the Seminoles and enslaved Africans who had run away to Florida, and the forming of a confederation fighting against slavery and, of course, desecration of East Indians, those Indians east of the Mississippi. A continuing and ongoing line of resistance into what is probably better known, the period of the 1960s, with the emergence of groups such as the Panthers, with the outside voice of Malcolm X and, of course, Dr. King, into a period where COINTELPRO and other state policies desecrated much of that movement, and that surcease that the Black Radical Congress saw as a call to re-energize, and indeed in that ultimately leading to the Black Liberation Movement, or the Black Lives Movement, same initials. So there is that through line into the current period of people strikes and 20 million people coming out, marching, not only here, but also across the globe. The fight continues.
Interestingly, you talk about, global solidarity. Tomorrow on Democracy Now!, we're going to be looking at what is happening in Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, and its most populous city, Lagos, where people are fighting against, thousands and thousands of people are fighting against police brutality. There's what are called SARS units that have beaten up and killed so many Nigerians. And we see this kind of, what we see in the streets of the United States is such an inspiration for people all over the world, and vice versa.
Indeed. One of the amazing things, and an example I like to lift up, is the case of Marielle Franco in Brazil, and a beautiful letter supporting the search for her killers by the Black Lives Matter network. Tremendous influence. I traveled with a group of young activists 3 or 4 years ago to South Africa. And at that time, tremendous impact and influence. Two-way, fees must fall. The getting rid of the Rhodes statue, paralleling what ultimately would happen in this country, and talking to often
statue to Cecil Rhodes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they removed it. They took it down. Speaking of the two-way impact, but what was very apparent in talking to these mainly students at Wits University was how powerfully what was happening here in the U.S. around Trayvon Martin initially, and then of course Michael Brown, and then ultimately George Floyd. So across the diaspora, but across the globe more broadly, the need for that kind of global struggle and solidarity is very much a part of the current moment, and the tremendous hurt and harm that can be caused when students and others resist the use of live ammunition in Nigeria, case in point. But in thinking about the Floyd uprising here in Minneapolis, the rubber bullets, the tear gas, devastating in terms of the impact it had physically on people. These are not benign tools. They can harm and maim and kill.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, just concurring that the national impact and the international scale of this has been amazing.
And we're also speaking on a day after the judge ruled in Louisville, Kentucky, that the grand jurors can speak about what happened in that secret grand jury and why it's possible that the police officers involved in the killing of Breonna Taylor were not charged in any way for her death. Only one of the officers was charged with wanton endangerment, wanton recklessness. And it wasn't even around Breonna Taylor's, the no-knock raid into her house, but it involved the bullets that went through her house to the neighboring apartment of white neighbors. That is the only charges that are brought. And the Attorney General of Kentucky said, well, they have an independent grand jury and this was their decision. And now one grand juror after another is saying, no, we were never presented with options that would hold the police accountable.
Indeed, grand juries are noted for such. Let's just think about Ferguson and what happened with that grand jury. Hopefully this will open up.
And with Eric Garner.
Space. And with Eric Garner. Absolutely. Yeah, we shall see.
Now we're going to open up this discussion and we want to bring Rob Robinson in so we can read some of the questions. Hi, Rob. It's great to see you. You might be muted, but we want to see if anyone has posed some questions or has some comments who are in the audience right now. In these highly unusual times where we gather virtually, it never made me appreciate more the sacredness of community, actual physical community when we
absolutely
all get together, and what that means. And even our workspaces, from Democracy Now! To the Community Service Society, what it means for so many people to work at home. And even that is a luxury for those who can't. Rob.
Absolutely. So I just quickly, before I ask a question, and there's several great comments within the chat box, but I want to give a shout out, and it's also printed in the chat box, that Kali Akuno, the founder of Cooperation Jackson, will appear at the conference tomorrow afternoon.
Oh,
so we had conversations around Kali, and there's a link to People's Strike that Rose referred to that's also in the chat. I will challenge a little bit some folks that I know out there, Alita Torre and Melanie Bush. You guys are making a lot of comments, but I'd ask you to come on and really ask some questions. But there's a great question by Lisa Albrecht that I think will stir a good conversation here. And it's Lisa asks, do you believe we can still build cross-racial alliances, especially given the incredible anger of Black and brown people towards us white folks, and in parentheses, for good reasons?
Mm-hmm. Well, they are actually already happening, aren't they? And shout out to Lisa, also a great colleague. We've written together way back in the day. They're not easy. They're not simple. And, back to that Audre Lorde quote about the seat of the oppressor. The normalizing of authority has a way of playing itself out. Who's listened to, who's heard, and we have to be very careful in the cultures we create as movement builders, as scholars, and act not in possibility, but with eyes wide open and with care. Are those kinds of cross connections possible? They've been very difficult in this country. I mentioned the fact of the masculinist nature of many struggles. That intervention has been powerful, but we're still contending with the long legacy. And not surprising, because the very fiber and nature of the society lifts up, valorizes whiteness without even understanding that it's happened. So it's an internal struggle as well as an external one. And it's only under those conditions that I think we would have the kind of righteous but necessary intersecting struggles that will be essential to social change.
So again, we encourage you to put any questions you might have in the chat. Rose, I'm going to take this opportunity to sort of build on something you and Amy both talked about. And for me, as somebody who's been participating in social justice work for about the last 15 years, there seems to be a shift for me, especially with young folks out on the street. There's a different thinking amongst these young people and their young white allies that I haven't seen. As Amy alluded to, young folks were in the street night after night after night. And, I'm working in the international community, getting responses from international allies going, Rob, that's powerful. So tell me how that evolved. What's your thoughts on how that evolved? What changed and where did that change happen?
It's interesting. I don't think it necessarily negates Lisa's comment about the work that still has to be done. But, just take the case of the uprising in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Many of the young people and younger people who were involved cut their teeth on the murder of Jamar Clark, which happened 5 years ago. They took over the 4th precinct on the north side. They held that precinct for at least 3 weeks or more until the state came in and dismantled it, but created this alternative vision of community that I briefly referenced, providing food for people, caring for folk, even in the midst of white supremacist violence coming into the space. And these are some of the same people who were front and center at the Floyd uprising, understood, by the time they're in their 20s, late 20s. And also, a new generation of under 20s who are not so deeply connected to organizing, but really don't have anything to lose in terms of standing tall and straight. And, I think the intergenerational piece of this is to ensure that the consciousness, the political education, the organizing that has to happen, the movement building that has to happen, it's more necessary than ever, especially with the energies that you identified. And of course, we live in a time and space where social media, which I said little or nothing about, is a connecting thread for all younger people in a way that, of course, when we were cutting our teeth in terms of resistance, just wasn't there. So it also opens up a different kind of space, a different kind of conversation. I'm glad Amy mentioned the TikTok. That to me, that made my day when I heard that they had made a TikTok that gave the impression that there were going to be tens of thousands of people there.
Right. Yeah.
It was. I mean, I lived on that for weeks. Now, see, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about in terms of creativity and ingenuity. Yeah.
higher education is going to change. I mean, with this whole online experience. You're a professor at the University of Minnesota. I mean, everyone's online, but
Absolutely.
change the level of access people have to education. I mean, just a kind of unusual byproduct of this, that if people continue to live, go to school like this, you can't possibly charge what you were charging before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's for true, not only at my university, but across the country. It remains to be seen. Time will tell. I do know another piece, back to Rod's point, is that our struggle around Black studies and ethnic studies, I am convinced, given the students I've taught and the eyes wide open that that kind of liberatory education provides, has planted a seed for many, an awareness that wouldn't have been there. So shout out to the Black Studies movement and ethnic studies in terms of its role in consciousness, in vision, and in just opening up a set of ideas that business as usual under the old model of higher education would not have revealed. And of course, there is tremendous pushback on that. There's another struggle that's going on around the maintenance of those departments and those programs. Been going on for a very long time.
Absolutely. So we have a question from Melanie Bush, and that question is, what reflections do you have about the kinds of organizing, formation, strategies, and tactics that are emerging in this moment? And how do we fight and forge, build the world we want while we're deeply in struggle?
Well, don't have a choice. I mean, all we have to do is study the great revolutions of the 20th century. Cabral is my go-to. The 13 years that was spent in terms of the struggle against the Portuguese in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, very strategically beginning with mapping out the terrain. Left his secure middle bureaucrat position, returned to Guinea-Bissau. I could have lived comfortably as an agronomist, didn't, knew his people very well. We don't know our people well enough. We're not rooted as deeply as we should be. He scoured that land. He mapped the meanings and the sensibilities. And I mean, we're at one level of this and demand a deeper level of strategic thinking about the work that needs to be done. He understood the Portuguese so well that the soldiers who came to fight against the PAIGC were so struck that they returned, and that emboldened them to fight against the fascism of the Portuguese. I see it as the longer haul. We're in a different context. We have a pandemic. But we have courage, and we have commitment, and we have minds. And it's through our working together and thinking through this, understanding who our people are and how our people are, that I think is a key piece regarding the forging ahead that's necessary. Oftentimes we move too quickly. I love the uprisings and the message they sent. Direct action is paramount, but we need all those things intertwined from my perspective and my experience in my own work.
We're talking about the uprising in the streets, and I wanted to get your take on the squad, especially because you had Ilhan Omar, who represents your area, with the Twin Cities, the Congress member who is Somali born, came to this country, who Trump has made a particular target of. But not only her, of course, and then you have Rashida Tlaib, and a Palestinian American who represents Detroit, and then Ayanna Pressley, the first African American woman to represent Massachusetts in Congress. And of course, in our area, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You have this remarkable group of women that looks like it's going to expand much more in this new Congress. And the role of Congress, if you can get women of color like this in Congress, if you have a deep belief that not only the streets can change the world, but actually places like Congress can.
Well, potentially yes. Potentially yes. It's a particular social construction. It has a particular set of rules and regulations and procedures. And no doubt, these center-left and left legislators can play a role. How deep, how consistent, from my perspective, observing over time what it has looked like, always the pressure from us to them, not to be absorbed, not to be, shall we say, deluded in their convictions. And obviously, a critical mass of numbers will matter. Hopeful that many more of that left perspective will be in Congress. But let's not, delude ourselves. It was a struggle to even get the most progressive plans and policies within the Democratic platform. I mean, that's for real. So, as we defeat Trump, you've got to organize in a different way. And let's be clear about what we're dealing with. Policy can matter, and hopefully it might, but it's not a guarantee.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the vice presidential running mate of Joe Biden made her name nationally. I mean, she was a senator from California, Kamala Harris, and before that, Attorney General and DA in the Bay Area. But she made her national name on the debate stage against Joe Biden, taking on the issue of segregation, taking on the issue of fighting for racial justice, and saying that Joe Biden didn't represent them. Now, of course, they've come together, they're a team. And I'm wondering your thoughts on, though you may have a more receptive team if they were possibly to win, and if the president were to leave the White House peacefully, a lot of ifs.
A lot of ifs, yeah.
But on the approach the streets have to take to the Democratic establishment.
Well, yeah, obviously, strategically thinking in this very difficult, what I call capitalist crisis, you want some space to maneuver. And seemingly, that will buy a little bit more space and time. I don't see either of those individuals necessarily standing for any dramatic political changes, but obviously after the current president, it will be a degree of surcease, I think, that those of us who are pushing for something deeper and more substantial will have a space to work in. And obviously there are left forces that are getting a lot more sophisticated about how you use the electoral arena to achieve certain goals as a means to an end. And that makes quite a bit of sense from the perspective of the longer role to transformation.
So a couple of more questions have come in the chat, and Aleda Torre, who's been very active in the chat with a lot of comments, but lists several organizations, and she says some of the big forces are, people strike, rising majority, grassroots global justice, democratic socialists, the Southern Movement Assemblies, Black Alliance for Peace and Justice, unions, and mutual aid forces. What are the common visions they should connect with? Or is it co-ops, political education, and feminist economy? I guess there's a lot of different directions we can go to with political education. But where should the focus be?
Well, it's going to have to be a multiple focus, as you well know. And I know Sister Lita has been quite determined to get all those groups in an assembly together. And if you know anything about a people's assembly, that means you have a group of folk who have to be in some kind of coalescence to move an agenda, to move a set of actions. But, the kind of silos and conflict that has historically confronted forces in the society will have to be contended with, and have to be in conversation together, have to be in a mutual relationship to one another, which is one of the, I think, important things about the People's Strike, bringing a number of groups under that umbrella for a particular end. There right now, some of you might know, a pledge which commits to action to ensure that over time we can transform this society to something that may approach a solidarity economy, or an economy of resources for all the people. But getting in that space, she knows this, generating those assemblies, moving the action plans in some kind of common direction. You don't want to divide and conquer, that's for sure.
Professor, let me ask you a follow-up question. I work a lot in the international community. You know that. You've been in the international community. And one of the practices in Brazil with political education, I think, speaks to what you just talked about. They use the term formação, which is Portuguese for formation, right? Versus the way we organize here, which says meet people where they're at. And I always brought the argument to the social justice world here. People are all over the place. It's going to be hard to organize people. But in Brazil, they say formation, bring everybody to a political space. Then we move together in formation to make the change. So it's a different process. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it's incredibly smart process. And, given the long durée of struggle for political change in this country, we need to be very mindful of our international folk, learning from them. And that's one example of something that can be integrated into the kind of work that's going on in the U.S. But, there are other examples also. But thanks for lifting that up, Rob.
And we have a great question from Mo Beasley, who will be a performer appearing at this conference in due time. Mo is asking a question. We have a New York City gangster in the White House. And what are the protocols to combat such an uncommon adversary in the Oval Office?
Well, y'all in New York now. If anybody knows how to combat. Hey, you got that one right. Stone. So, you do what's necessary, and that means, we're gonna win this. We're gonna make sure it happens.
We say organize. Right?
That's what you have to do. Exactly.
Right? We have to get out. Right. We have to talk to one another. We have to bring people together. The people's assemblies, as you discussed, we have to come together and discuss these issues. So,
move in a somewhat common direction. Right now, in terms of what I've seen, the energy is high. But this is not just about one individual. And I hope in my remarks I made that clear. We're talking about a social order that is in real crises, from the needs of the earth to the needs of human beings. So our vision has to be deeper. It has to be longer. But this is a start, actually.
So let me ask you about the white supremacists and white Aryans who've been arrested in Michigan and in Utah just in the last week. But it goes to this point. You have this group of 13, now 14, I forgot even what they're called, the Wolverine Watchmen, I think, who were organized, kidnapped for You have the white Aryans in Utah. There were like 21 of them. And the Attorney General of Michigan, also a woman, said that this is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, there's a lot of concern about election violence and what could happen afterwards. President Trump continuing to incite them. He doesn't at any point mention these arrests. Instead, he continually attacks, for example, Governor Whitmer. But these formations, if you will, of these white supremacists, you can't even call them militias, of vigilantes, going back to Timothy McVeigh, and of course you could go back further than that.
We'll just go back to Tulsa in 21. Let's start with that.
Okay. But the idea that when we say those white nationalists, those white Aryans, that you can then, people can feel safe saying that the governmental structure is separate from them. I mean, Trump has certainly brought them together, but the idea that you have to take on white supremacy within the government, not just these, you know, far right formations outside.
Well, yeah, that was the point of my comments, that it is absolutely constitutive of the U.S. social order. So it's not about one individual or a set of violent vigilantes, if you will, but it's about a social order. That's the reason the tinkering around the edges, that won't get us where we need to go. It is important to know, however, that they are dangerous and violent, and that as we step out to ensure that our voices are heard, we have to be clear about the kind of responses we're going to have to that. And there's no if, buts, and ands that these very short days before the election, after the election, into whenever, are going to be very volatile ones from my perspective.
And the whole issue of voting, if you could take that on, I mean, we have never seen, well, that's not true, but we are seeing a major voter suppression, of course. Right now, Ron DeSantis is desperately, the Florida governor, trying to stop people who were formerly incarcerated from being able to vote, even though, astoundingly, Amendment 4 that Desmond Meade pushed forward, who himself had been formerly incarcerated and wanted to vote and went to law school, it had the vast support of a cross-section of Florida, and it passed with very little resistance. But then Trump's ally DeSantis comes in, and he is desperately, because we're talking about more than 1.2 million people in Florida who would be able to vote, and they're desperately trying to stop this by then imposing this law that said you have to pay every single amount of money you owe to the state before you can vote. Talk about a poll tax. And you know, the state doesn't even know what these people owe, and they don't even have the full logs of this. But
they don't care. They just want to stop it.
So everything from that to in Pennsylvania, just stopping the absentee ballots, even though President Trump absentee votes himself. What about that whole voter suppression effort all over this country, and how you think it needs to be taken on now and in the future?
Well, it's serious. And in fact, one of the very important groups in Florida in the 2016 election were the Dream Defenders, who through their very righteous work were able to get the reinstatement of ex-incarcerated folks' voting rights. But I mean, that's what we need to always keep in mind. As we're looking at them, they're looking at us, and plotting and scheming. And this is a power struggle. If people will understand that the stakes are very, very high, and that the power struggle is one in which we're dealing with folk who will go to the ends of the earth to hold on. I mean, there are a lot of layers to that, and we don't have time to get into why that's the case. But clearly, it has a long history in this country. And this is just emblematic, whether it be DeSantis in Florida or wherever, through hook or crook, holding on to that power. Mm-hmm.
So, Professor Brewer, we have a question from Andrea Nasca, which basically is looking at the truth. How can we, as be practitioners or a force for truth? You know, in this time of disinformation, algorithmic manipulation, and a lot of that is done by social and mainstream media. And I think Amy can speak to this a little bit too, because
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Around about salivating for mainstream media,
right? You know, right.
So I'd love to hear. I think both of you can comment on that question.
Is she seeking just good sources, or it's just a critique, the media?
And asking the question, how do we, that's media that uses fears of racism and hate and weapons to divide people. How do we work around that? My short answer is always, let's make our own story, right?
Well, that would be my response. I mean, alternative media, and there's some out there. Of course, you're going up against a corporate system where 5 entities own all of these media, and I don't need to speak to that. Amy can definitely break that down, but that's the reality of what we're dealing with. And I always say, eyes wide open, understanding the nature of how news is produced, how it's conceptualized. One of the good tools for anybody is to be able to dissect media, to understand how they put together a story. That's something we can train our folk in. And I know Rob and I, going to the conferences in Detroit for many years, that's a tool that should be widely disseminated. And even more so as social media has taken on the role of disseminator.
Right.
Of all kinds of information.
And gotten around the gatekeepers of the community. There's so many levels to address this on, but I mean, it's so important to shore up independent media.
Absolutely.
There are these spaces like public access television, like community radio stations, Pacifica Radios as well, the oldest independent media network that when we talk about war and peace, we're not brought to you by the weapons manufacturers. When we talk about inequality, we're not brought to you by the banks and the financial institutions. When we talk about the climate crisis, we're not brought to you by the oil, gas, coal, and nuclear. But brought to people by the listeners, the viewers, the readers that care about authentic, honest information, and how critical that is to connect the dots of these remarkable places that people fought for all over this country. Interestingly, in Jackson, Mississippi, one of the things that Medgar Evers did right before he died is they took back a TV station. One of his last speeches on a TV station there. And many feel that that just infuriated the white supremacist community there before he was gunned down. But I am also deeply concerned about what is happening right now, not in Trump TV, Fox TV. We know what that's there for. Echo chamber for Trump to feed him the ideas that they want to feed him. And that's where he chooses, for example, his next cabinet members. I mean, people like Dr. Scott Atlas, who is now his COVID whisperer. Right. Who believes in herd immunity, right? Let it rip through the population. Don't give people masks. Don't get people to social distance. Don't give people tests. Just let it rip through the community. Or make millions of people. And that's who he chooses. And of course, he was on Fox before. But it's not so much Fox. It's MSNBC. It's CNN.
Absolutely.
they have found their backbone now because Trump has so fiercely attacked them by name and also their journalists by name. And so they stand up and they do what the media should do, which is be oppositional. But at Democracy Now, we have believed you have to be like that in a Democratic administration as well as a Republican administration. But the other thing it's doing, while it does take on Trump, is it's taking him on with a kind of coterie of, a gathering of, a resuscitation of the past national security establishment. So you see on these networks, you know, the former heads of the CIA, the former heads of the FBI and the National Security Agency, all of them are fed up with Trump, saying he doesn't represent them. But they and the former, you know, members of the war establishment, they owe so much to Trump really resuscitating their reputation. Let's not forget how many people died in the bombing of and the wars against Iraq and Afghanistan. And they are now gaining so much credibility because they're saying this man in the White House has gone, you know, way, way away from all of us. Now, it is going to be very difficult once this all changes to challenge those people, because now they are who populate the establishment media, who for just a moment now have become oppositional because of, as you were talking about, it's not just one man in the White House, but that's what they're seeing it as.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you for that assessment. So we have a question from Erin Washington. And what do you both think about Diddy's Our Black Party and Ice Cube's plan for Black America?
I assume that was a facetious question.
You never know. So,
as I won't say as quiet as it's kept, but it is certainly clear that Black life is diverse. That there are conservatives, that there are classes, there are internal schisms, divisions. And the way this system has operated from its very inception is to catalyze as deeply as they can those divisions. Going back to the media point, though, is it's very interesting that these are the spokespeople for a community of 45 million folk or more. And it's the Democracy Nows, the Pacifica, that you get voices that actually are rooted in struggle, that actually are rooted in education. But it's certainly in the interest of the powers that be to lift up the Diddys and the Kanye Wests and the whomever else, to confuse, from my perspective. It's a reality. But again, the African world is not uniform. There certainly are forces within it that are not aligned with what I call the Black radical tradition. And we just have to be very clear, going back to Cabral, about really understanding the community that you're dealing with, being able to survey it and map it from one end to the other. That's serious political work.
That's right. Thank you, Professor. So I'm going to make a call for final questions before we get ready to close out, and we'll give Professor Brewer and Amy Goodman an opportunity to close it out. If you have any final questions, put them in the chat. If not, I'm going to proceed and just close out this dynamite conversation. I always learn in these spaces. I've been blessed, and I'll share with the crowd that I've worked with the professor for about 10 years. I think we met at the U.S. Social Forum in 2010.
We did. Yeah, exactly.
As I started my journey in organizing, which started at 2007, here in New York with Picture the Homeless, getting the opportunity to understand struggle for folks who have been engaged and who've been writing and understanding it in a way. It's been a blessing to work with you. So I've enjoyed every moment that we've shared together and learning from you. And hopefully, as I always say, and you've heard me say that, I should learn till I go to my grave, and I'll stick
We're
close to you.
back at you, and especially around that technology stuff.
So it's an opportunity. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy Goodman to close us out. And hopefully, Professor, you'll make some final comments, and then we'll, look forward to the rest of the conference.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
Well, I'm going to leave it to Professor Rose Brewer, but I want to thank everyone who's come out tonight for the beginning of this absolutely critical conference on full participation, and really encourage people tomorrow night to watch this conversation around healthcare, which is so absolutely critical. The idea that we are supposedly the most powerful country on earth, yet we do not have universal health care or Medicare for all, and health care as a human right. And today we see the horrific, lethal consequences of this when we face this pandemic. I wish we could say the pandemic, that's behind us, but what we are facing now with this third surge, it has, to say the least, exposed so much that we have to take on. Our work is clearly laid out. I want to encourage everyone to tune into Democracy Now! At your local community television or radio, or go to democracynow.org. We're there, as you know, every day live at 8 in the morning, 8 to 9. And we are, the key word really is unembedded. We're not embedded in the establishment. We're not embedded in the corporations as the corporate media is. We are a forum for free speech, for people to speak for themselves. And that's what we need all of the media to be, to frame their own narratives. Because it's only then when people can speak from their own experience, whether it's a Palestinian child, an Israeli grandmother, whether it is an aunt from Iraq or an uncle from Afghanistan, that people sharing their own experiences breaks down caricatures and stereotypes that fuel the hate groups that thrive on ignorance, us not knowing each other. I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth. Let's not let it continue to be wielded as a weapon of war. So check out democracynow.org. And Professor Rose Brewer, I leave you with the last words.
Well, so much has been shared. Thank you, Amy Goodman, for the conversation. I have no doubt that our work is before us. I am very, very, very moved by the conference and its content. And one of the best things in the world is for us to share our knowledge, our experience, our organizing efforts, our vision, our political will, because this is going to take, for the kind of society that I'm imagining and I'm envisioning, deep political will. I'm hopeful for the population of this country, more hopeful than I've been in a long time. I'm very, very moved by the energy and the courage of a young generation. As Fanon has often said, up to that generation to decide what its mission is, to carry it out or betray it. And very, very hopeful about the intergenerational possibilities of this work. Not easy, but not impossible. And the conversation and the work and the vision and our courage is what's going to move us forward. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. And don't forget, wear a mask, save lives, protect yourself. And the best way to do that, among other things, is to vote. It is so important that your voice be heard.
Good evening.